I'm really happy that you guys can come on up, that Sasha is our moderator. Felt really lucky that Sasha was one of the first community advocates I met when I came to Eureka about 3.5 years ago. Sasha is an environmental justice advocate and organizer with COPAL and the Minnesota Environmental Justice Table. As an advocate, his work focuses on addressing issues in Minnesota's regulatory system with a focus on empowering environmental justice communities. His goal is to make systems that center justice and equity and ensure marginalized voices are included in the process. So I'll turn it over to Sasha to lead the panel on the state of zero waste in Minnesota.
Thank you, Lucy. Hey everyone, yeah, I'm really excited to get into this panel. I'll go ahead and get started by introducing our wonderful panelists. Starting, I guess, going this way, so not in the order that I have in this cool paper. First off, we have Leslie Myint. Leslie Myint is an associate professor of statistics and data science at Macalester College. She is a member of the Sierra Club Zero Waste Task Force and has been helping with research and activism for the Zero Burn Coalition since February of this year. And next we have Maggie Schuppert. Maggie Schuppert is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at CURE, a Minnesota-based rural community advocacy organization that works on energy, climate, and sustainability. Maggie lives in northern Minnesota and joined CURE in 2021. Among other things, she leads their work on zero waste and their opposition to incineration. Before moving to Minnesota in 2015, she worked around the world with communities adversely impacted by large-scale energy and development infrastructure projects, helping them fight for their communities' rights. She brings this commitment to environmental justice, rights, and accountability to her advocacy and organizing work in Minnesota. And lastly, we have Chris Olson. Chris is the Repair Department Manager at Repowered, a Twin Cities nonprofit electronics recycler where he oversees the refurbishment and resale of thousands of electronic items annually, keeping them out of landfills and in the hands of community members who need them. A passionate advocate for their right to repair, Chris testified before the Minnesota House and Senate in support of the Digital Fair Repair Act, which passed in 2023, giving Minnesotans greater access to the tools and information needed to fix their own electronics. So huge thanks to everyone on this panel, and let's go ahead and get into it. For the first question, just to kind of help get a little bit more into each of their backgrounds, how did you get into this work, and what does zero waste mean to you? And I'll go ahead and hand it to you, Leslie, and we just kind of go down the line.
So I had a beautiful chance encounter with one of my colleagues in December 2024. We met in a lunchroom, and she said, I just read this amazing book. It's called All We Can Save. So for anyone who hasn't heard of this book, it's a collection of essays by women essayists and poets who have been working on the climate crisis in various capacities. I read it, and I knew immediately that I had to do something about it. In a very urgent capacity, because I was going to be on sabbatical in this calendar year, and I decided to devote it completely to climate change and trying to create a sustainable future. And so I did what I could. I just joined things like the Sierra Club, and that's how I learned about the Zero Burn Coalition. And it's been amazing to work on such an important issue that impacts our local community, and I'm in it for the long haul.
Thanks, Leslie. I think I and CURE came into the work around zero waste more broadly through our opposition to incineration, to garbage burning. We work, a lot of the focus of our work is in the energy and the climate justice issue space. And so, I think folks here are probably pretty familiar with the HERC and the issues around that, but as Representative Long and Lucy sort of alluded to, Minnesota is the state, the third state with the largest dependence on waste to energy, quote unquote, waste to energy facilities. And all of those, other than the HERC, are in greater Minnesota. And so as a rural greater Minnesota focused organization, this is an issue for us. But we also have the realization that if you are going to oppose incineration, you really have to think deeply about the larger crisis of waste. And really sort of think about how we are going to reduce this issue of waste at the source if you want to really make an inroad around the issue of opposing incineration. I think as I have gotten more deeply into this work, as someone who works, again, in rural communities, looking to bring rural communities into the conversation around climate and the environment and environmental justice, sometimes in spaces where that terminology and thinking about those things carries a bit of sometimes even a stigma. I see waste and zero waste as somewhat of a gateway issue. It is something that I think we can we can talk about across divides often, because everyone's concerned about garbage. Everyone can see how it is building up in our communities. And the burdens that imposes. And we've seen that in our work, that folks will come into the conversation around waste that might not have come into the conversation about climate and the environment through other means. And so I think that's one of the really exciting things about it for me.
So I've been pretty much a lifelong advocate for zero waste. I've been at Repowered for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I've had several jobs been in different industries. I was a recording engineer, so I used to work in recording studios, and so I have my own recording gear at home. And I really got into the whole idea of repair when, over time, things wear out, things break, and I certainly don't have the money to replace. And so I'm like, okay, I still want to use this thing. What do I need to do? And, thanks to YouTube University, been able to, find many people that, can tell you how to fix something from different perspectives. And so anyway, at Repowered, I oversee all the folks that are, fixing, refurbishing, and there's so many things that we get in that are still completely useful, or they might need just some minor repair. And so I guess for me, zero waste means, one part of zero waste for me really means looking at these items that people deem no longer useful, and helping them to see how they can easily repair them themselves, or they can provide them to others to repair. And I think that will really cut down on the amount of waste that we're producing in general.
It's going to be some fun cable management. Great. Well, thank you all for sharing a little bit more about your backgrounds, how you got into this. I think we have some really great perspectives on this panel. So let's go ahead and get into some more specific questions. These next couple of questions, I have one for each of you. So I guess we'll start with Leslie again. The HERC incinerator has been a flashpoint in Minnesota's waste debate. Can you share where the campaign to shut it down stands and why closing it is so critical to achieving a just zero waste future?
Sure, thanks, Sasha. So I guess, is it important for me to give a little bit of context on the incinerator? So the Hennepin Energy Recovery Center is a waste incinerator that is currently located in the North Loop of Minneapolis. It was built there in 1989 after years of community opposition, even then. And that community, the North Loop community, was in 1989 and still is a community that faces a lot of burdens. It is an area that has a lot of polluting facilities already, the HERC just being one of them. And so it's been 36 years that this facility has existed and 36 plus years that activists have fought against it. And so that's a long time to be fighting this. So currently, so I'll back up a little bit. In 2023, Hennepin County and the city of Minneapolis passed resolutions that vowed to close this incinerator. And the stated promises were to close that incinerator in a time span of 2028 to 2040. That's a huge time span. Some commissioners have pushed for the earliest possible closure date in 2028. So that said, there have been promises. 2023, we vow. It's 2025. Frankly, the county has made no real concrete steps to close the incinerator, despite their vows. The Zero Burn Coalition and all of the individuals involved had been showing up, talking to commissioners, advocating at Hennepin County board meetings, and saying, like, you made this promise. When is it going to happen? So logistically, what needs to happen is that the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners needs to initiate a vote to start a sequence of logistical steps to close this incinerator, and they refuse to initiate this vote. And it's frustrating. They are essentially stalling. They're pulling every argument that they can think of to say, like, well, we can't because, well, Minneapolis needs to get to zero waste tomorrow. Or we can't because we would need to build more landfills, or our landfills would run out of space, or trash would pile up on the streets. All arguments that, if there's interest, we can get into more, but that are fundamentally unsound. And the real danger of this is, as Representative Long and others have spoken to before in this session, like, waste to energy is really holding us back from zero waste. Like, the psychology of it, as well as the political will behind it, like, if you think that burning trash just makes it disappear, I mean, it seems like that's what the county commissioners think, but, like, that's just not true. Physically, like, you can't make matter disappear. It goes up in the air as air pollution and comes down into our soil and water. And not all of it disappears. A lot of it still, like 30% by volume, remains as ash that is heavily toxic and has its own landfill in Rosemount. And so just the will behind saving waste to energy is a huge barrier to us achieving zero waste. Like, millions of dollars go into running this facility, and in net, this facility loses millions of dollars a year. And so those millions, what could we be doing? Everything that we can towards zero waste. Propping up organizations like Repowered that actually give back to our communities. Yeah, so.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, it's been a wild ride following this campaign and being part of it in some areas, and just seeing how often promises are made and progress is not. So definitely a frustrating situation. And thank you for all of your work and for the Zero Burn Coalition's work as well. And it does give us a good segue into the next question for Maggie. Minnesota is making big decisions around landfills, organics, and waste to energy. How do these choices impact our ability to meet climate goals like the 100% clean energy bill?
Oof, it's a big question. So I think there's two positive trends that I would identify that I think are also converging in a way that raises deep concern to me, that are relevant to this question. I think the first trend is, why we're all here today. There is, I think, there have been leaders and community folks doing the work around zero waste for decades. Many of them are here. But I think we're seeing renewed and increasing energy and enthusiasm for thinking deeply and creatively and critically about how we handle waste. I think that's reflected in the emergence of the Zero Waste Coalition, the fact that we have legislators and community representatives here today, the passage of, as Representative Long talked about, the passing of the EPR bill, which was a really notable achievement for the state. So that's all very exciting and something that we have to build on. I think the other positive trend is Minnesota's continued commitment to the clean energy transition. Even in spite of maybe what's happening at the federal level and in neighboring states, Minnesota is currently maintaining its commitment to that. However, these trends are also, as I said, coming together in a way that's concerning to me, and really this is about the sort of convergence of the waste sector and the energy sector, often under the banner of clean energy. And waste to energy, I think, is really emblematic of this, which is it is often presented as, its proponents presented as a climate solution, right? As renewable energy. It is still considered renewable energy in Minnesota, although the HERC has been exempted from that definition. And we're seeing this growing as we are looking, as industry is looking to, the waste industry is looking to sort of take advantage of the clean energy transition and some moves away from fossil fuel energy. They see space there. And so we have, the waste to energy sector, we have the wood biomass sector, which are both industries which very much still exist in a problematic way, but had been declining in sort of popularity and investment, and we are seeing that start to shift now. We also have sort of emerging technologies like so-called not really renewable natural gas, which is made off of organics waste, whether that be food waste or agricultural waste, is really sort of getting renewed attention and investment, including from the state of Minnesota. And I think this is just something that I really want folks to be paying attention to. Representative Long mentioned the 100% carbon-free standard, the 100% law, 100% clean energy law gets called different things. That the passage of the law was really monumental and something that a lot of folks worked really hard for. It is currently being implemented at the regulatory level, and we are poised to see things like waste to energy and wood burning and also renewable natural gas be included in our definition of carbon-free. And that means that creates an incentive, a subsidy. It's going to drive both public and private investment towards these technologies in a way that I think we need to be really concerned of. I will mention the HERC. It's exempted from the definition of renewable energy. It might not be exempted from the definition of carbon-free energy, which means it will start getting those subsidies from how we are funding and accounting for our move towards quote-unquote clean energy. And that's, I think, really concerning and something that we really need to remain attuned towards, because this decision is going to be made fairly soon about this definition of carbon-free. Folks have been fighting to make sure that it is its best version. It is not clear that that's going to happen, and should we see this really problematic definition of it implemented, it's going to require communities then fighting at the facility-to-facility level, at the project-to-project level, to make sure that we don't see an expansion of these technologies in a way that we know harms communities, that we know harms our climate. These all have emissions related to them that are really problematic and hidden in certain ways. And as Leslie said, right, like I think considering things like waste to energy or wood burning or renewable natural gas, giving them the designation of clean energy is antithetical to the zero waste movement, because you are commodifying and making you are turning waste into a profitable commodity, and that's going to incentivize the further creation of it in a way that is really, I think, dangerous and something that we all need to be prepared to fight against.
Thank you, Maggie. And yeah, I'm really glad that this whole event is like putting more focus and emphasis on waste as a climate issue. I think at surface level, for a lot of people outside of the movement, it's easy to think of waste as just litter and landfilling, which is important still, but it's really important also that we consider it within that context of climate change and how it's impacting entire systems. So thank you, Maggie, for sharing a little bit more on that. Next question for Chris. Electronics are one of the fastest growing waste streams. What progress has Minnesota made on e-waste legislation, and what do you anticipate happening next legislative session?
So I'm not an expert on all of the legislation that's been going through as far as e-waste, but I will do my best. And if I say anything that's inaccurate and you have better information, please let me know. So I know that back in 2006, there was a disposal ban that was passed in Minnesota, the Minnesota Electronics Recycling Act. So it made it illegal to dispose of electronic products such as TVs and computer monitors in landfills in Minnesota. And I believe what the law says is you're not allowed to put or consider covered electronic devices into the landfill. So so like CRT televisions, flat screen TVs, computers, things like that. However, there are still several things that are not on that list of covered items. In fact, I believe the EPA and some of the counties, I know Ramsey County, on their website, they say, like for some items like small home appliances that don't have circuit boards necessarily in them, those are okay to put in the trash. And like alkaline batteries, because they're not cost effective is what the reason I was told to recycle, that the counties and the EPA say, yep, you can put alkaline batteries in the trash too. So that was just my 2 cents on as far as things that are still the case that can be updated. There was proposed legislation, I believe it was this year, that passed it passed the House, the state House, but it got stalled in the Senate, and that was the extended producer responsibility for a new e-waste bill that would cover 100% of electronics recycling for Minnesota residents. And so it would be a new system that would be established where manufacturers are responsible for funding the collection and recycling of the products. A fee would be charged at the point of sale on most new electronics, so it would be a 3.2% and a flat 90-cent fee on cell phones to pay for the program. There would have been free consumer recycling, and the definition of e-waste would be expanded to include a wider range of electronic products beyond just computers and TVs. And there would be a nonprofit organization run by manufacturers, overseen by the MPCA, that would manage the collection and the recycling efforts. So it was, like I said, stalled in the Senate. My understanding is we're still pushing forward. We're still going to try and get in there in the years to come. But unfortunately, for right now, it's dead in the water as far as this coming legislative session. However, Minnesota is one of the few states in the nation that has the right to repair legislation that passed in 2024. If you're not aware, what is it? The goal is to make things easier and cheaper to fix your electronics and to reduce electronic waste and extend the life of devices. So the law says it went into effect on July 1st, 2024, and it applies to devices sold after July 1st, 2021. It does not, unfortunately, cover vehicles, medical equipment, farm equipment, or gaming consoles. I believe security equipment is also one in there. But what the act requires is that manufacturers must provide access to parts, tools, and any sort of diagnostic equipment and repair information to consumers or independent repair shops to be able to perform their own repairs. And that's still in effect, and we're still trying to get some of those things that were excluded, put back in, such as farm equipment and video game consoles. But those industries obviously have a lot of money and a lot of lobbyists. So So that's why I know as far as legislation in Minnesota.
Thank you, Chris. And yeah, I think that's a really good example of something that Lucy talked about a little bit earlier of like, how are we looking at these issues in terms of managing the waste, but also like preventing the waste in the first place. So like, e-waste recycling is an important way of managing the waste that is created, but right to repair is a good example of legislation that can help reduce the amount of waste that's created in the first place by making it so that we can actually repair our products instead of just having to throw them away and buy a new one. So the next couple of questions are for all three of you. I know I'm not sure if we'll be able to get through every single question, because we do want to leave room for audience questions at the end as well, and we want to make sure that everyone can get to lunch on time. But for this next question, I think I'm going to start with Maggie, and then we can just kind of pass it to whoever would like to go next. What do you see as the biggest barriers keeping Minnesota from moving faster towards zero waste?
I'll answer this question from the perspective of someone who lives in rural Minnesota. I think the biggest barrier is infrastructure. I think there is far more energy and desire at the individual level. Obviously, we have a ton of work to do there in terms of education and helping people come around to the idea of zero waste, but there's far more energy and desire for that, I think, in rural and greater Minnesota than there are sort of the facilities and the infrastructure for folks to do something about that. I find that all the time talking to folks either in the community or businesses that want to change their waste practices. And it's just really, really difficult because we don't have access to composting by and large other than backyard composting. And obviously there are limitations to that. Recycling even, that's sort of the most basic and not even the most ideal way to deal with a lot of our waste, but even that can be really limited. This is sort of anecdotal, but we did an event up in Ely where I live recently that Eureka came to, and we were doing what we could to make it a zero waste event. And Lucy had to take back all of the compostable materials from that in her car back to the cities because we don't have anything to do with that up in Ely. And so that's not an ideal situation. So I think we need that infrastructure, we need that investment, which I could talk a little bit more about. But and I think related to that, I think a concern that I have, because I think in greater Minnesota, there is a move currently in terms of how we deal with waste, sort of where currently a lot of the policy and the investment is going is towards centralized waste management, industrial scale waste management. So whether that be, unfortunately, incinerators, incineration facilities, we have currently sort of the rise of industrial scale anaerobic digestion, which is more or less industrial scale dealing with organics waste. There are a number of issues with that, but just from the basics of making infrastructure accessible to broadly across the state, centralization isn't going to work in places where you don't have population density, but you do still have people and you do still have waste. And so that's sort of another thing that I'd like us to think a little bit more holistically about.
Sorry, what was the question? One more time. I want to make sure that I'm... That's what I thought. Well, within the e-waste sector, I think obviously this bill not passing is a huge problem, but the bill really focuses on I think convenience is what's going to, obviously, is going to make it for us to be able to get to that goal. This bill would have made it 100% recycling covered for residents and businesses. And like Maggie was saying, there's a lot of industries that for recycling, like big industries, even here in Minnesota for e-waste, right? So I work for Repowered. We're a very small little nonprofit recycler and refurbisher. There are much larger places, and those places tend to focus more on volume, right? So, and they're all about recycling, right? Getting those materials recovered, but they're not as much as for reuse. They do for certain items that are profitable, like computers and things that are easily resold. But a lot of the smaller things that like Repowered tends to focus on, things like smaller, lower value items. Those end up just kind of getting recycled, instead of getting reused or repaired, those are just kind of recycled with the rest of it. And I think if we're gonna get to this zero waste economy, it really need to work on slowing the waste stream. I think 100% of electronic recycling being covered is great, but I think we need to really change the culture of making it convenient for everybody to recycle, and making sure your neighbors, if they're not able to make it to the recycling facility to be able to take their electronics, maybe that's something we could, there's a lot of community pickups that are organized in different neighborhoods. That's something we could even do on a neighborly level. We could just do that for each other and make it as convenient as possible to recycle.
I'm fully on board with themes that Chris and Maggie have brought up, like convenience and infrastructure. I feel like those point to visibility. And so I've thought a lot about visibility and invisibility in this regard, like having neighbors who are willing to do pickups for you. That makes zero waste more visible. Having a building like with a clear sign, infrastructure, that makes it visible. And so I've actually thought a lot more recently about the converse side of that, invisibility. I feel like there's a lot that's invisible. And so one thing that I've seen that's invisible, funnily, how do you see invisibility, is with respect to education of youth. My daughter's about to go to public school next year, and I really don't know about environmental education and zero waste education in schools, and that's something that I wish were more visible. It's just hard to learn about like what schools provide that type of education. And I think another thing that's been on my mind with regards to invisibility is the way that our big centralized waste processing facilities message about what they do and don't do. So I trained as a Ramsey County recycling ambassador in fall of 2024, and I learned about the way that Ramsey and Washington counties deal with their waste. It's at the Recycling and Energy Center in Newport, just east of the river. And they told us that it is a facility that recovers some things from the trash stream, and the remainder that can't be processed. Well, what they can process really is mostly just metals. They're able to be pulled out mechanically. But what can't be processed gets turned into an alternative form called refuse-derived fuel. That's essentially pelletized trash. It's processed into a form that can be made into small pellets. And that gets actually sent to two incinerators in the state, Excel Red Wing and another one in Mankato, the Wilmarth facility. I feel lied to as a recycling ambassador. When we received that training, the representative from the Recycling Energy Center told us, it's just the, nutrient-rich stuff that falls to the bottom of the waste stream that we collect and process as refuse-derived fuel, but come on. I really only learned the truth of this recently. And so I'm just bringing this up as a source of invisibility, like the lack of transparency in what our facilities do. If that were more visible, I think it would make people angry. It certainly has made me angry. And I think we can all understand the power of an angry room. Like that's what the action station is down the hall are set up for. So like, I think maybe not a barrier, but an opportunity for zero waste acceleration is us getting angry.
I love that energy. Next question, I'm actually going to start with you, Leslie. How do we make sure that frontline communities are centered in decision-making about waste policies?
For sure. I think, where are the days of door knocking, I guess is my first answer to that. Like, honest to goodness, like one-on-one engagement, I feel like is sorely lacking. I know that I know that some of our big agencies purport to do community engagement, but I guess I truly wonder who that reaches. And so along these lines, there's a story that the Zero Burn Coalition is involved with, that other organizations in the cities have been involved with as well, particularly ACER, which is an African education resources organization. There was $26 million that the legislator had set aside to build a waste processing facility in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. That would essentially be a processing facility for trash to try and recover recyclables. And that was planned without any engagement with the people living in Brooklyn Park. Community leaders in that organization, when they learned about this, were flabbergasted and angered that no one had reached out to their community to ask if they wanted a waste processing facility there and if that was the best way to serve the waste needs in their community. And so I guess my answer to that question is, like, anyone involved in zero waste management needs to talk one-on-one with people, not just rely on online surveys and not just say, hey, we attended a conference where only industry experts attend, and say that's enough, because it's not.
I think another great way is, well, as far as the legislation, I think, it's just important, like you said, to get out there and engage with each other, engaging with your neighbors. And, shoot, I had a really good point. And shoot, darn it, I'm so sorry. I had something great I was gonna, I think oh, of course, okay. I think one thing is, it doesn't have to do with legislation necessarily, but, helping to really center this whole conversation in frontline communities is a lot of the fix-it clinics that the counties and different organizations are organizing. I think, especially in frontline communities, folks are a lot of times not, going to have the funds and resources to be able to buy new things when they break, and just empowering people with, hey, you can fix this. It's not that hard. Let me show you. It's just these little tricks, here's some things to look for. And just, helping people to feel comfortable with the whole idea of fixing and repairing. And then that's knowledge that they can then share with other people in their circles. So I think repair is definitely the way to go.
I'll just say very briefly, and this is sort of, where I spend a lot of my time thinking, there are spaces where the big decisions are made about these kinds of things. Often that happens at the legislature. I think, community advocates and we've sort of not perfectly figured out how to bring community voices into decision making at that level. It is designed to be representative of communities, of constituencies. There are a lot of decisions made at the regulatory level, agency level, talking about invisibility, that are not seen and that are where we deeply need community, impacted communities, frontline communities, to have more of a voice and to have those spaces be more responsive to folks. That is not a nut that we have cracked. It is one that we are thinking about constantly, and I think is the ongoing work that we still have to do.
Yeah, I'm glad that you made that point, Maggie. I think so many of these systems were very intentionally designed to like not be accessible for a lot of people, and so yeah, it's really important that we find ways to change those norms, bring people into the process, and when we're crafting these policies and work to implement them, that we're making sure that it's based off of people's lived experience, that people actually have buy-in into the policies, so that they truly want to engage with the infrastructure, the programs, all of that stuff. Next question, I will toss it to Chris to start out with. What opportunities do you see for collaboration across your different areas of work, policy, advocacy, and business to drive bigger change?
Let's see. So, of course, I'm going to come from the repair viewpoint because that's my specialty. I think for businesses, and so we work with a lot of businesses. As a nonprofit, we go out and do pickups. Pick up their electronics for recycling. They don't have to go with us, with a nonprofit. They could go with the much larger organizations. And so, and the fact that we are doing a lot of refurbishing and we offer things for sale at a big discount for what you'll find online or other stores, and then we're able to get those devices into the hands of community members that need them. The decision to recycle with us, I think is one important thing that businesses can do. And as far as the legislators, we've been working a lot with within with the other organizations that are supporting the electronics recycling bill and the other bills that are going through. Because my specialty has been mainly the right to repair, I don't have a lot to say about the other legislative topics, but I think businesses can really just be thoughtful about how they're getting rid of their devices, and people, when you go to buy a new device or you recycle the old one, really thinking about where it came from and what's going to happen to it at the end of its life.
Maybe I think picking up on right to repair, I think it's a really good example of how much opportunity there is at both the community and economic development level to think differently about waste and how we deal with waste and reduction, especially at the reduction and reuse level. We are seeing large industries, as I've talked about, see opportunity in the waste sector at sort of in the areas where we would like to see less activity. But I think there is real opportunity for localized, place-based opportunity in communities, both urban and rural and suburban, to think about, what can we bring, what kinds of new businesses, services, job creation can we bring to our communities by thinking differently about reduction and reuse. And that's, again, why I'm actually excited about this work as opposed to just feeling demoralized about it.
I guess to add to that, I feel like all of us in this room, we have a deep understanding of our own community needs. And I think this touches on what Chris and Maggie have said. Like, we know our community best and what waste needs would best serve our community. And so I didn't know about Repowered until someone told me about it. And so that's the power of community. That's a power of community. Like, just being able to know what each of us are doing and being able to advocate for creative ways to live more sustainably based on these connections that we forge. I love learning what everyone is doing, so I think that's one of the biggest ways that we can at least start to collaborate.
Great, thank you all for that. We have two last questions, and I think for the sake of time, I'm going to try to combine them. Hopefully this doesn't turn messy, and then we'll get into some audience questions. So for our final question, and we'll start with you, Leslie, and just go down the row. What does a zero waste future look like for Minnesota, and what is one thing that people here today can do to support us getting there?
Oh my gosh, this is... I guess I dream about a community where we move slowly. And by that I mean, like, I think that a lot of troubles in our society stem from capitalism, needing to go fast, always needing to be productive, and that distracts us. And so zero waste for me is intimately tied with capitalism and anti-capitalism. Where we have the opportunity to slow down, think carefully about how we care for each other and the earth.
So much fun here to do to help us get that.
Be willing to let something take you, and be inspired to try something new and go with it for a little while.
That's hard to follow. I feel like this is going to be much less inspiring and like making you think deeply about these things. But I mean, what I would like to see, I think I've said the word investment a lot. I think that's something that I'd like to see, and I think a good indicator would be, Lucy showed, the zero waste hierarchy, as well as Minnesota's waste hierarchy. Zero waste advocates take issue with Minnesota's waste hierarchy at the bottom and how they prioritize things. But the place where those two hierarchies are in line is at the top, that prioritize reuse and reduction. That is not reflected in where we see investment at the state level or in the private sector right now. And so if we could shift that would be in line with policy. And I think it would really do a lot to move us towards zero waste. And I think it's doable. But I think what people here can do, among other things, is, again, sort of in question where the investments are going now. When it is proposed that we put $26 million into a centralized waste sorting facility, or $20 million into a new centralized anaerobic digester, why aren't we using that money to invest at the actual top of the hierarchy, which again is in policy and is what we have all across the board in theory committed to as where the priority should be? And so I think, I think it would be, if we could see that happen, it would be a reflection that we are moving in really concrete ways towards zero waste. And I think it's something that folks here can have a say in.
I think, and this is probably very obvious, but I think one of the biggest things that's going to get us to a zero waste future is what we're doing here today, which is information sharing, which is us, we're all going to learn something here today, either from, the speakers or from the booths that you're visiting, the folks that you're talking to. We're going to learn things. We're going to make connections, and then we're going to have knowledge that we're going to be then passing on to other people in our lives. And it's obviously a simple thing, but I think the more of that we're doing, and the more that we have the knowledge that we can then share in conversations with other people. What can each of us do to get there? Well, of course, you can buy refurbished electronics, of course. And you can make sure to recycle the electronics that you have responsibly. So that's my spiel.
Thank you all for that. I think we have a bit of time for audience questions. Do we have a mic for the audience, or what's the best way to do this?
Well, if you want to prepare outside voices, then it's but that's it. Yeah.
All right, do we have any questions? Yeah.
I think so I'd love to usually talk about medical waste. In southeastern Minnesota, incineration is absolutely huge. We can just keep evolving how is more disposable, how period is being. Who is working on that? What the heck's do we do about it?
It's a great question. So to repeat it for anyone that might not have heard it, what can we do about the issue of medical waste, and are there any groups that are working on it actively here in Minnesota? Yeah, I think we can open that up for anyone in the audience that might have a response to that as well, because that is a very important question that, is anyone here actively working on it or know any groups that are actively working on the issue of medical waste? Yeah, Kathleen?
We have a commitment working at finance store there with healthcare systems. So like one of our solutions of that necessarily just on the way because the medical aid study is very difficult to actually reflect what situations about that's an explain or everyone that's like health that's work.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Any other questions? Yeah.
So one of the things I that interests the areas trying to scan individuals to taking more and I got like hey I will then like I will pick up like for people and bring them to the job I will take a donation and I share credit some people back and then like that's individual find out like I get there's so much on fire in the world like I don't have the the bond like my or like it's just easier to show it over whatever and like and then when it comes test then or like I don't know how to get more excited. I don't know how to get like here.
Yeah, thank you. So just to repeat the question, it's a really important and very big one. So we'll see if we have any responses up here. And also, again, if anyone in the audience would like to share their own thoughts or experience, please do so. But the question is essentially, how do we get more people to engage in practicing zero waste, especially when there is so much burnout, there's so much happening in the world that it's a much lower priority for some people to engage in these issues. So anyone on here want to take a crack at that?
I hope this response doesn't feel trite in some ways because I mean it deeply, but I would encourage you to find other folks to do that work. And again, right, like you're nodding, and so I don't mean this to be like, yes, it seems obvious to some degree, right? But even, I think that's what it requires, right? Like your efforts are really inspiring, and right, but like the concern is that you feel you don't get a response, right? So I think it's really important to find others, whether it be in your neighborhood. For instance, you could sign up to be part of the Zero Waste Coalition, where there is a whole bunch of folks who are trying to figure this out, right? So that would be what I would encourage you to do, because I think trying to do it at an individual level it's always going to be challenging, and so I think it's about finding the folks who want to try to build that momentum with you.
I totally feel that. Speaking from personal experience, I bought an A sign to put in my yard, and I was just like, let's talk about waste. And I sat outside, and I advertised it the week before. I was like, I will be sitting outside in my yard from 10 to 12. We can talk about waste. But guess who came by? my partner who lives with me. We sat outside together. So I get it. But so I balance that. I still try and do that from time to time, but I balance that with what Maggie is saying, like being in community with people who energize me.
I think one thing you could do is work with other people to organize a community electronics pickup event. I think sometimes, I'm like this where if someone comes and says, hey, I could do this for you, and I think I might get a little overwhelmed, be like, I don't have the time, go through it. But maybe if someone had a date, in the future, like, okay, this is the day we're having it, then they could have some time to prepare, and make it a little easier, easier for them. So.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly say, I remember, I think it was last year, Time is Fake, but we had the event down in Mankato, a zero waste event down in Mankato, and there were so many people that showed up with clothes that they didn't need anymore. There's a clothes shop or a clothes swap. There were so many opportunities for people to, practice and engage with zero waste, and also do it in a community way and a fun way. And I think that was really helpful for getting people to show up, kind of like what Chris was saying, having a specific event, a specific place that's about zero waste. People can show up together, be in community with each other, share resources, share tips. All of that felt like it was a really good way to get people to engage further. But it is, a huge question, and I would definitely second the point about working with people in spaces like this who do care about these kinds of things and want to show up consistently. And I think it is easier for people to engage when they see it's not just a small thing, but rather a lot of people doing it. So thank you for that question. Yeah.
I just want to share that there is that because there's everything we have to see while done today is my investment boost that some didn't make with it. And this thing that he has partnered with others with it, and he did it, he didn't what's on. Guys, maybe there's a need, let's try this good, and that's right, we want that, don't want it, that's the idea. So that's the starting of that kind of, and then it's that's sure about it.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, do you have something?
Yeah, to follow that also works in sort of when it's an independent event, they get going okay, and before everything, the barriers to entry are much higher. That you tag on to a couple of 3 days in the garage sale, and then even night out. And then about those kind of events would pay. You got 3 or 4 events each year or in a year. I would be available. We took our gonna happen to people, and I noticed the word library. It's a neighborhood thing. Why do I need to pay? Oh, do this part of that stuff. And
That's great advice as well. Yeah, do you have something?
So I'm here today because I joined as a fire to group and black the water that last year. So, and this lab started work, all these cross connection, why I get involved. I would say recently joining that group was to prove life with Soviet today. First foremost, you developed in black.
Thank you so much. We have we have something here and then over there.
well, thank you all. I was wondering if you know about any innovative or inspiring actions municipal governments are taking across Minnesota to a year away. Maybe beyond.
Thank you. I'll just repeat that for anyone that might not be able to hear it. Do we know of any actions that are being taken at the municipal level of government to advance zero waste across the state?
I mean, you said it's beyond composting. So I think there are a couple of places, outside of the cities, right? Like there's a lot going on in the cities, and I feel like other people can speak to that a lot better than I can. But there is, for instance, in Morris, Minnesota, where we have, a university. They have for over, probably approaching 2 decades now, been doing a lot of work to think about sustainability in general as a community action that involves all levels of officials and governments, all levels of government and official, but also community groups. And I think I think that's something that I'd look to in terms of making huge advancements. You know, and that's not to say that everything that they're doing, you know, would necessarily be something that I'm like, oh, all communities should do that. But I think it's a place that's been thinking about this for a while, and how do we do it in a very like sort of planned and thoughtful, and as I've been saying, invest in it over time. And I think there's some other sort of counties, you know, that ones that you might be surprised about, you know, Stearns County, that's doing a lot in terms of waste. They do also have a small incinerator, which I'm not thrilled about, but they are also thinking about waste in general and how they can deal with that in, I think, in multiple ways. That folks aren't necessarily aware that this is happening in other parts of the state. But again, it's really challenging for counties, both in terms of resources and policy barriers, and also just imagination, I think, for to think about how we can do things differently. So it is fewer and farther between in terms of examples than I certainly would like to see.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Over here.
Yeah.
I want to talk on to what you had just said something that you do had to do something so but when you want to sort of sustainability of their waste. A lot of it's coming out of there because they just do the office out here you. But now I put you back with the question to the gentleman far end. I'm sorry, missed your presentation. And I came in to say the right to repair. I was wondering if you're working alongside the farm or kind of like actually inside Minnesota to have their right to repair on their farm. But then talk to that, they didn't try to see too much that do it.
Yeah, thank you. Just to repeat the question, when it comes to right to repair, has there been work recently in collaboration with farmers in Minnesota on making it so that they can repair their farm equipment?
That's a great question. As far as I know, there are still groups that are working to get that part of the bill that was carved out to get put back in. I don't have any specific examples for you right now. I know I was very disappointed when that was taken out of the bill. When I testified in the House and Senate committees, there was a farmer that also was testifying alongside me, and it's a huge issue. You know, these farmers that, you know, they have these newer tractors that have the computers in them, just like a lot of our cars do, and just like our cars, if something goes wrong with that software, it's, you know, even more of a huge deal to farmers, because that means their livelihood, they're not able to harvest the crops at the time they need to be. So, but I'm not currently up on where we're at with that, but obviously I'm hoping that there are groups working with it. I'm sure there are.
Yeah, I do want to say it's greater than just the tech on the tractor equipment. It can be as minimal as like the winch, they have the contact that manufacturers stuff that each on like, and you know that's something that could be done like the glass. Like a farmer could do contract with purchasing that equipment. Can't do that.
I mean, there are a number of groups, but Farmers Union is probably the one that this is going to continue to be a legislative priority for them. They are, of course, up against big ag manufacturers like John Deere and others who do not want to see this, and so there's a lot of work to be done to sort of counter that bounce. So thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, Lucy.
So just thinking back on Philly comment, Eureka sent out something watching night search here as well. I also did that slides that also in actually something that we have that our customer. And they're interested like why she's done it as in a way. So we have to decide about how we target them, target the state candidates that often in a way as the community. But my question is just to know whether we have, I'm wondering if the past actually featured its resource management report for the agency during the city the third time that the states adopt the blueprint or how we usually get zero waste, whether we like that to use this video or not, but there yeah, something on that draft. So yeah. Jim, what?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in 2023, the state legislature passed a bill to require to have the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency do a kind of a report of Minnesota's resource management situation. So basically, the bill says MPCA figure out what would we need to do to get to, I think it's 75% and 90% diversion rates away from landfills and incinerators by, I think, 2045. So like Lucy was saying, kind of like what is the path forward or a potential path forward for very ambitious zero waste goals in Minnesota. The MPCA worked with a company called RRS, Resource Recycling Systems, and they are currently finalizing the draft report that is due to the legislature by this coming January. And that report will go out for public comment soon. I'm going to follow up with them on like the details of exactly when. It's required to have 2 months of public comment, so I think they basically have to get it out like ASAP at this point. But just a heads up to keep an eye out for that, because that'll be an opportunity to provide that final feedback on this report that will help to inform legislators of like what is the path forward for zero waste. And so it's really important that we get community voices, advocate voices, making sure that that report actually outlines what the path forward that we really want to see, so that legislators can use that report as like a guiding document for years to come. But I think we're about at time, so can I get one more round of applause for our amazing panelists? I guess you can clap for me, I guess. All right, and am I passing it back to you, Dee?
Awesome. One more time. Let's give a round of applause. Amazing. So we are about to break for lunch. Again, lunch is provided by Pimento. It'll be found close to the back of the building, next to the auditorium. But before we break, I do have a couple reminders for you all. Again, please try to stay the full day if you can. Today's about not only being in these sessions together and exploring all the different activities that we have, but it's also about building community, right? We're seeing a lot of scary things happening, not only on the federal level, but even in the state, right? If you all know, one of the big utility companies here in Minnesota, Minnesota Power, just recently got bought out by a private equity firm, right? These scary big things are already happening. These big scary actions are already getting done, right? But it's going to be important that we have conversations with each other. So as we get into our break and you get lunch and you get to explore all the different things, make sure you talk to someone that you probably don't really know that well, right? Make sure you're talking to the tablers, make sure you're talking to the panelists that were just up here. It's going to take a lot of us to get to push back against the private equity firms that are not only trying to privatize our healthcare and our housing, but now they're trying to privatize our energy and our utilities, right? So it's going to be a big fight. It's going to be a big fight to not only fight them, but to make sure that our leaders are being held accountable and fighting back as well. So while you explore the Action Center, make sure you read over all the different things that our partners are doing. Make sure you check out the clothing swap. Make sure you check out the different vendors that are also with us today. But I am excited to see you all here again at 1 o'clock. So if you can, please try to make your way back here at 1 o'clock. We're going to be talking specifically about plastics. So I'm very excited for that conversation, and I hope you guys can stick around for it. And yeah, have fun at lunch.